Hello and welcome back to Leader Up, a podcast of Army Management Staff College. Leader Up is a professional conversation where we discuss a broad range of leadership and leader development topics with an emphasis on the Army profession. I'm your host, David Howie. The Army Civilian Corps is changing. It has changed and it will change more in the future. In the past 15, 20, 25 years, the role of Army civilians has deepened, broadened, and expanded. Because of that, the way the Army sees its roughly 330,000 Army civilians has also needed to change. In the spring of 2021, an article was published in Military Review magazine called One Profession, Two Communities, and the Third Rail We Cannot Ignore. And we're going to hear more about that title in just a few moments. But today on Leader Up, we have the authors of that article, and I'm going to bring them in right now and introduce them. And first is Mr. David Cavaleri, who is the program manager for the Army University Civilian Development Integration Office at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. David Cavaleri, thank you so much for being with us today on Leader Up.
Well, thanks very much for having me.
And our second guest is Dr. Van Knolton, who is the director of the Army Aviation Civilian Personnel Proponent at Fort Rucker, Alabama. Dr. Knolton, Van Knolton, thank you also for being with us today on Leader Up.
Well, thanks. Appreciate you having me.
Thank you, both of you gentlemen, and I'm happy to see these two gentlemen today. All three of us used to work together on the staff here at Fort Leavenworth. That was many years ago. And I just want to start off today with a little bit about both of you, kind of about your current position and a little bit about your background as an Army civilian. And let me start with you, David Cavaleri, where you work now and what your job entails and a little bit about your background as an Army civilian.
Sure. I'm happy to, Dave. So by background, I'm a retired soldier, and I'm now 15 years into my second career as an Army civilian, all of them thus far as a supervisory GS-14. I began as a staff manager here for a 3-star headquarters, moved into a couple of different settings with the Army Management Staff College, and now as the program manager for the CDIO, I manage Army People Strategy Civilian Implementation Plan actions that are support or directly associated with the develop talent line of effort. That's just a little bit of background for how I got to where I am now.
Okay, thank you. And that's kind of what we're going to talk about today is this idea of developing Army civilians. And thanks for being with us. And let me go to you now, Van Knolton, just a little bit about what you do now and your background as an Army civilian.
All right. Hey, thanks, Dave. As you said, I'm the career field manager for the Army Civilian Corps, Army Aviation. Formerly, I was the Career Program 64 manager. With the implementation of the Army People Strategy, we've changed our names a little bit, so we're not career program managers anymore, but we're all wrapped into one career field, 11 separate career fields, but all of us are there. I supervise aviation workforce analysis, skill gap identification, recruiting, marketing, apprentice program, and primarily, I'm concerned with the systematic development of Army Civilian Corps, Army Aviation members. I'm retired from active duty, did about 22 years active duty, and in a couple of months, I'll have 15 years as an Army Civilian Corps member.
Okay, thank you. And as I said earlier, I certainly do appreciate you being with us today. And I want to get into this article that you wrote that was published in the spring of 2021. And the title, I want to start with the title. And let me just go over this again for our Leader Up audience out there. The title is One Profession, two communities, and the third rail we cannot ignore. So what are the two communities? What's the third rail? Why did you choose that title and that phrase? And David Cavaleri, I'd like to start with you on the answer for that one.
Yeah, and Dave, you probably should, because depending on how you look at that, I'm either to credit or to blame for convincing Van to agree to that title. So it's partly a tip of the hat to our doctrine, our Army doctrine, that describes the Army profession as consisting of, my word is community, but it's two cohorts, two components. On the one hand, the profession of arms, think uniformed soldiers, and on the other hand, the Army Civilian Corps, and we call those the two communities of the one profession. So that's how we get the first part of the title. Now, with respect to the second part of the title, this mysterious third rail, that's an homage, if you like, to my earlier, younger days riding the subway system in Boston. And I think the metaphor applies equally well to subway system in Washington, New York City, or Chicago, where you see, as you're standing on a platform waiting for the train to come by, warnings are prominently displayed all over the place against coming into contact with the third rail that you can see running along the ground. And if you listen when it's quiet, when you're standing on a platform waiting for the train to come by, you can hear that rail hum as the electricity reminds you that the rail is both critical to the system's effective operation, but it also warrants and deserves your respect, because if you don't treat it properly, it can cause a lot of damage. So as we thought our way through the kind of messages that we wanted to share with the readership, we wanted to reinforce ideas about profession and community, and also the importance of what we consider to be a third rail that we get into later on in the article that really warrants attention and more discussion.
Okay, and Dr. Knolton, did you have a response to that title?
Yeah, Dave, thanks. That is definitely one of the ones that Dave Cavaleri came up with, and he said, "Hey, I got this really catchy phrase, and here's kind of what it is." But we talk about as we talk about in the article, we talk about in a political environment those things that you don't want to touch, because, like Dave said, that third rail is dangerous. So you got to really pay attention to it. So that's one of the things that we kind of wanted to pull the thread through the article and say, look, these are things that are sometimes not comfortable talking about, but it's things that we need to talk about. It's things that we need to kind of unpack and see it from different lenses and get different people to add their voice to this, so that we can see all those different things about how we view that rail. Because where you sit is where you stand. So when you bring your voices together, you got to kind of look at how that thing is going to impact the communities.
And that point that you made kind of leads me right into my next question, which is a quote that y'all pulled out from a book. And I'll read the quote to the audience, and then we'll talk about why you used it. And here's the quote: "The ability to manage difficult conversations effectively is foundational to achieving almost any significant change." And that's from a book that's called Difficult Conversations, How to Discuss What Matters Most. And Dr. Van Knolton, I'll start with you. That quote, how is that relevant to this topic that you wrote about?
Yeah, thanks, Dave. Yeah, so that's a really good. Actually, that's a really good book that both Dave and I attended the Harvard Senior Executive Fellow, so we actually got a chance to see the authors come in and talk a little bit. But there's actually a community of things that are surrounded or that surround difficult conversations, critical conversations, crucial conversations. So it's a whole community in itself. And George Bernard Shaw said at one time, the single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place, referring to conversations. And Doug Stone and his colleagues, good communication is important, both in formal negotiations and daily life. We figure that difficult conversations, as outlined in the book and as outlined in the community, are conversations that anything somebody doesn't really want to talk about. And put another way, in the Crucial Conversations book, they involve opposing opinions, strong emotions, and high stakes. So when we think about it, I mean, those are conversations that we have to manage on a daily basis, whether you're sitting around talking about football or baseball or sports. If you're arguing against the Steelers or the Chiefs, there's always opposing opinions that are out there. But again, how we talk to our employees, how we look at those things, how we manage those conversations on a daily basis are ways that we need to take and apply it to critical conversations when there's emotions at stake, when there are biases that are going to come forward. Sorry, Dave, go ahead.
What I think I'm hearing you say, and David Cavaleri, you can respond to this, is that this idea of talking about these two communities within one profession and talking about how we develop Army civilians can be a difficult conversation within the Army. Is that something that you've seen since perhaps you've been in the position that you're in right now?
100% spot on, Dave, 100%. And if you think about it, since we all are part of a hierarchical organization, the Army, this idea of having difficult conversations where you would have to surface, potentially defend oppositional views, it's the exact opposite of the way we were successful when we were in uniform, where we were, where we executed instructions or orders, perhaps even over our own objections, our personal objections. But if we as an Army Civilian Corps want to truly contribute to the Army's mission and Army readiness, we have to be willing to defend positions, admit that perhaps our positions on a certain subject might be, out of touch, and then negotiate, compromise our way to success moving forward. I don't think either Van or I wanted to be perceived through this article as being just a couple of other guys who were complaining. We wanted to contribute to conversations that would help improve the situation and improve Army readiness. And that's why this notion about difficult conversations is really critical to not only to the article, but I think to the success of the Army Civilian Corps.
And you did lay out towards the end of your article, and we're going to talk about this in a few minutes, about some of the things that you recommend that you would like to see done as a way to take care of some of these challenges that we have. But I want to go to a phrase, and I'm going to start with you, David Cavaleri, on this one. It's a phrase that's in your article, and we've all seen it and heard it, but I just want to know what it means to you and why is it important. And it's a simple phrase, and it's the total Army. What does that phrase mean, and why is it important that we, as both uniform folks and Army civilians, see the Army as a total Army?
I'd be happy to. And if you'll indulge me for a moment, I have to share a couple of numbers that kind of help set the context for what the phrase you asked about means, this idea of the total Army, but then also where we as Army civilians fit into this larger construct. So the total Army people enterprise serves about 3.5 million people. And in that pool of people, really, it's a subset of the American society. So I've narrowed it down to 3.5 million people. There's just about 1 million active guard and reserve soldiers. We often hear those referred to as the three components, the three compos, active guard and reserve. So there's 1 million. There's roughly 300,000 of us who call ourselves Army civilians, GS and wage grade. There's another 1 million plus family members. Add on to that number roughly 900,000 retired soldiers and about 100,000 surviving spouses. You add up all the numbers, and we get to this idea of 3.5 million people associated in one fashion or another with the total Army. Now, when Van and I wrote the article, the Army Civilian Corps represented just about 23% of the Army profession. Remember the one profession and the two communities I talked about? It was the first question you asked me about in the title. So the Army Civilian Corps represents about 23% of the Army and roughly 8% of the overall Army enterprise. Those are not insignificant numbers. And the message really for our readers is that the Army Civilian Corps, we represent collectively a significant segment of the total Army. And because of that, we have a responsibility to meet, and I would submit a contribution to make. We have a responsibility to make a contribution in terms of Army readiness. So we're part of a group that's part of a group that's part of something larger. And oftentimes we forget that because we've become, I think, very comfortable with using this word enterprise to describe what we belong to.
Okay, I want to go back to some things that you've talked about in your article, and you used the term friction, and you talked about 3 areas of friction or components of the third rail that you talked about. What are those 3 areas of friction, and why do they matter to the Army? And Dr. Van Knolton, I'll start with you. I'll give you first bite at that apple.
All right, Dave. Thanks. So that's a great question, and just touching on the things that Dave was just talking about. He just described all the different components of people and those little areas that we have. In my day-to-day dealings, I deal with the active force. I deal with Department of the Army civilians, both in active and the reserves. So when we talk about these components, this friction, our 3 components that we chose to initiate the discussion with are friction between the 2 Army profession communities, as Dave described, the uniform and us, friction that's internal to the Army Civilian Corps, and friction that's generated by the legacy talent management procedures and policies and practices in the Army Civilian Corps. And we think they're important as to get the conversation started so that we can start unpacking some of these perceptions and biases and preconceived notions and help us to engage with some of those difficult conversations that we as an enterprise need to have so that we can achieve everything that we're trying to achieve at echelon. So perceptions vary with experience, location, missions, etc. Where you sit, where you stand, and that's how you view the world. We generally found in the literature and in the interviews that we conducted, they generate some trends that are useful for engaging in some of the difficult conversations. All friction isn't bad. We know that, but we have to acknowledge it, unpack it, and then use that so that we can forward the mission that we're trying to get to. In Jim Collins' book, Good to Great, as I know that you guys are very familiar with, him and his team talk about leaders who are first ambitious for the company. They're driven for that organization, that level 5 leader that's out there doing. And my Navy colleagues, they talk about it in shipmate self. They talk about everything goes to the ship first. So you sacrifice yourself for the ship. You sacrifice yourself for your shipmates, and then you come up last. And what that really means, in a lot of ways, is it's helping us identify how we attack these conversations for the institution, for others, and then for us. I mean, in the end, who gets the credit? Does it matter, or do the results matter?
I when I became an Army civilian back in 1994, I called my brother who had been in the Marine Corps, and I told him that I had gotten a job as an Army civilian, and he said, "Oh, I know who those people are. They never go to the field and they don't do PT." And back then, that was kind of the view of the civilian employees, and I think all three of us know that we're called upon to do way more than that now, particularly with the advent of the Installation Management Command, where civilians just were responsible for so many important functions across the Army. And David Cavaleri, did you have anything to add about those areas of friction that Dr. Knolton just talked about?
The only thing I would add to Van's description is that an admission, on the part of us as authors, that these are certainly by no means the only friction areas that exist either internal to the Army Civilian Corps or internal to the Army profession. They just were the ones that I think we could both gravitate to because of personal experience, and ones that we've heard about frequently through daily interactions and the people that we spoke to about the article. So every reader will react, I think, in one of a couple of ways to any of those three. Is like, yeah, I've seen that, I've lived that, or no, that's not one of the most important ones. I would have replaced it with fill in the blank. And that's okay, because it means the reader is thinking about what we wrote and personalizing it as a way to get ready to have one of those difficult conversations.
And I wanted to ask about a term that I've seen, I've heard. I just want to get it out in the open, talk about it, define it, and talk about why it matters. And the term is talent management. And I want to start with you, David Cavaleri. What is talent management, and why does it matter for the Army Civilian Corps?
Well, what a wonderful question. And I think what I'll do is I'll practice something you taught me years ago when I first joined the Army Management Staff College as a brand new course director. And it would be to say, well, David, that's a wonderful question. What do you think talent management is, and why does it matter? I'm just teasing you. You said we could have a conversation. I'll share with you what we think, what Van and I think, and it's that for those of us who are not professional human resource specialists, we don't deal in the everyday world of human resources. That term, talent management, it connotes a system or an approach that manages an employee's career. I'm doing air quotes right now, between the lines. What I mean by that is between the time we join an organization and we leave it. But if you take the time to study the Army people strategy, you'll see that senior leaders, Army civilian senior leaders, have reframed that notion of talent management for just a portion of a civilian's career. And they're now describing it in terms of a holistic approach that begins first with acquiring the talent and then developing and employing the talent over the course of an Army civilian's career, and then taking deliberate steps to retain that talent for as long as both parties agree. So it's a start to finish. It's a full spectrum approach to acquiring and then helping us develop and manage and then retaining this critically important Army talent for as long as possible. And then you asked, why do I think it matters? Well, I think it matters to us as Army civilians because this approach represents, it's not only a comprehensive perspective, but perhaps more importantly, it implies a commitment on the part of the Army enterprise to continuously invest in Army civilians far beyond our initial onboarding phase. And getting it on paper, getting it an approved strategy, and then following it up with a civilian implementation plan, and then making some significant procedural and process changes attests to the seriousness with which the Army is approaching this new frame for Army civilian talent management.
And it's not just a matter of mimicking or copying the kind of career management or talent management that the uniform side has, because they do things a certain way. And correct me if I'm wrong, but the right kind of system for Army civilians is not just a copying or a mimicking of what uniform folks do. Would you agree with that? Is that a fair statement?
I believe it's a fair statement, and I agree with it. And I can give just one example of how the profession of arms talent management, the soldier talent management system, fundamentally differs from the one that we leverage for the Army Civilian Corps. And if you think about it, soldiers in uniform, the popular phrase, was up or out. It's constant progression in terms of increased rank and responsibility. And when a soldier reaches a point where he or she chooses not to pursue that upward mobility or is physically unable to do that anymore, then they have other career choices. And all of us as soldiers, all soldiers, we assess into the profession of arms, generally speaking, at a pretty low rank. On the civilian side, we're hired for skills. And as long as we maintain the relevancy in those skills, we don't have to progress in terms of positions of increased responsibility or authority. We are financially rewarded based on our production, which is tied directly to our position descriptions. There is no quote unquote up or out. And so just that one fundamental difference alone, we're not even going to talk in any detail about bargaining agreements or unions or the difference between Title V and Title X law. All of those, none of those nuances. Just the talent management approaches have to be different because the two cohorts, soldiers and civilians, are so fundamentally different, which raises an interesting question about how do you get two such disparate communities to commit to the same vision. But that's probably another article that Van and I should explore writing.
Van, did you look like you were going to have a response to that? Did you have anything to add?
Yeah, I'm sorry, Dave. Dave's got it. I mean, the whole thing that the Army is even considering talent management, beyond the position description of what an Army civilian does. And just when you and I came in, Dave said it, we get hired for a skill set at a certain level. The Army in the past may or may not, depending on where you sit, have thought about, I hired you at full performance level. There's no development needed. If I wanted you to be something else, I would have hired something else. So the fact that the Army is actually looking at going beyond the position description and looking at the knowledge, skills, behaviors, and other contributors that a civilian can bring to the mission enhancement, I think is just a huge step forward. There is a huge competition out there. I face a huge competition every day in Army aviation. My primary recruiting pool for instructor pilots is pilots who got out of the Army, from uniform. We just don't train a whole lot of age 64 pilots outside of the Army. But my pilots are in high demand in every other aviation industry, to include contracting overseas. So, for those that want to just come in and fly and look good in their flight suit and teach, we got that. For those of you that want to go do beyond that because they have some project management or program management skills, well, the Army needs that too. So here, let's go ahead and do some transition.
And there's a phenomenon in the Army Civilian Corps. I've seen it. I'm sure both of y'all have seen it, where you have someone at the, let's say, the 9, 10, 11, or GS-12 level who has been doing a job for 10, 15 years, maybe longer than that. And like you said, David Cavaleri, it's not up or out. They can stay in that job for an extended period of time. And not only as Army civilians is that acceptable, it's not just acceptable, that's celebrated, because when you have someone who has that deep background of experiences and knowledge in a single position, in a single function like that, it's really extremely valuable to the force. I think you both would agree to that. And that's kind of something that we need to preserve, that kind of a situation as best we can. I want to go to you, Dr. Van Knolton. Let's kind of start unwrapping this and bringing it back home to talk about how we address those frictions. And in your article, you wrote about 3 new components, things that perhaps we could start doing to try to deal with the situation. So what are those 3 components, Dr. Knolton, and how are they important?
Yeah, Dave, and another great question. So let me go back to something that Dave Cavaleri, my battle buddy, talked about earlier. These 3 that we put in the article were just to get the conversation started. They are by no means a bucket to put people in. So the 3 things that we kind of talked about was, number 1, kind of improving the communities of practice perceptions of each other. The second one is, exploring this one Army Civilian Corps, one team mindset, and then balancing transactional practices with transformational aspirations. And we kind of, maybe we'll unpack that one again in another article or something as we continue to do this. But remember, these 3 components are just a start, and they need to be unpacked. They need to be talked about. They need to be expanded upon. We need other people, other voices to get involved to kind of take a look at this so that we see it from different angles. And to understand also, they're not distinctly different lines of effort. We would recommend that you don't create a campaign plan for balancing perceptions and say, here's that line of effort and here's the milestones that we're going to achieve there. But they start us thinking about this operational environment and the current state that we're in, and then have a conversation about what we want the future state to be versus what we can afford. A lot of times we look out there and we say, well, we can't afford to train civilians the way we train the military. There's just not that many. We can't afford to PCS, senior civilians every 3 years like we do the military. Besides, they don't want to. And as we heard the secretary say in the AUSA this past fall, a lot of the senior civilians want to do that. They want to move and continue that kind of an impact. But the thing is, what is the objective end state that we want to achieve? So when we look at campaign planning, here's our current state, there's our future state. What do we want that to look like? And then we can go after that. And then we can apply, ends, ways, and means to try and figure out how we're going to get there.
And so let's look out into the future, and let's look 5 or 10 years down the road. And David Cavaleri, I'll let you answer this one first. What's it look like? What is the future, the desired end state for a successful and effective Army Civilian Corps? What's it look like, and what do we need to do to get there?
Okay, Dave, I'll take a shot at that one. I look forward to the day when Army civilians think of themselves as being in the Army rather than working for the Army. I think that kind of reframing represents a shift from performance compliance to personal commitment. And I think it's just as important that that kind of reframing is embodied by the profession of arms, with the widespread recognition that the Army Civilian Corps is essential to Army readiness. Now, if we're going to earn that kind of recognition as an Army Civilian Corps, I think we have to figure out how to continue to provide the continuity that you, Dave, were describing in your transition comments just a couple of minutes ago. That's because that's what we bring as Army civilians to the mission every day. The continuity based on longevity in the profession and the career. But how do we continue to bring continuity that is leavened with relevance? Because continuity that's irrelevant, and we've all seen it, is unhealthy. So if we want our soldier brothers and soldier sisters to recognize that we are essential to Army readiness, I think we have to earn that recognition. So from my perspective, if we can achieve that end state where we're collectively say, I am in the Army. It's not just working for I am in the Army, and I bring not only continuity but relevance. If we can achieve that, and if the Army can make good on its promise of investing in Army civilian development, I think we naturally become, as an Army, the government agency of choice in terms of public service. And that's what I would love for us to see, 10 years from now.
And so at this point, we're coming to the end of the conversation today about the third rail and the discussion that we do need to have around Army civilian development. And I want to go to both of our guests and ask, is there anything about this topic that you want to share with our Leader Up audience that I haven't asked you about? And Dr. Van Knolton, I'll go to you first on this one.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. I appreciate you having us in today, and I appreciate the audience that's listening to us. The one thing that I would like to say is, number one, is our underlying goal was to give voice to this concept of the Army People Strategy and the Civilian Implementation Plan, and maybe help start that conversation and just get it going, to get some other voices that are out there and some things that we can look at. By no means are our friction points the only ones, and no means are the things that we need to look at that we've identified in the article, the ones that need to do. Dave Cavaleri mentioned a little bit about this culture of commitment that we've got to get to. It's got to go beyond compliance and into some commitment that we're going to have to do from an organizational level. We need to take these conversations and remove the emotion as much as we can. And we know through conversation that you really can't remove all the emotion and all the biases. But one of the things that we learned throughout some of the research and throughout the interviews that were conducted is there's a lot of perceptions out there that each one of the communities have for the other one, and we kind of got to get past that. Throw the facts on the table and let's deal with it so we can get past. The second thing I would say is I am very encouraged by the conversations that we've heard so far, the ones that are happening right now, and I really look forward to the conversations that are about to happen. I'm truly excited about the direction that we're headed with the Army People Strategy and the direction that we're headed as an Army.
Thank you for that. And Dr. Knolton, I'll just say one more time, thanks for being with us today on Leader Up. And David Cavaleri, go ahead. You evidently were the brainchild behind this project. So I'll let you finish this up with whatever comments you have.
Thanks, Dave. I really can't add anything to what Van has shared. On this last question, he speaks for me in terms of passion and interest and commitment to the topic. I would extend a note of personal thanks to you and your production staff for inviting us to leverage this kind of a communications medium to maybe reach some members of the Army Civilian Corps community or even the profession of arms who aren't yet aware of the article. Now maybe after listening to our responses to your questions, they might be prompted to go take a look at the article and, with a little luck, engage in a difficult conversation of their own. So thanks for helping us get this message out there.
Okay, thank you. And this article is available online. If you don't get a hard copy of Military Review, if you just go out and search for the title, and the title will be in the notes for the podcast, but I'll say it one more time: one profession, two communities, and the third rail we cannot ignore. So all you folks out there in the Leader Up audience, go out and take a look at that article. And this podcast will kind of help explain it, and the article will kind of help explain this podcast. So they'll kind of work hand in hand. And so one more time, David Cavaleri, my old friend from AMSC, thank you for being with us today on Leader Up.
Thank you.
And Dr. Van Knolton, also thank you also for giving us your time on Leader Up.
Thanks, Dave.
And this is your host, your Leader Up host, David Howie from Army Management Staff College. Join us again next time for another edition of Leader Up.
As always, if you have any questions or feedback or would like to learn more about our podcast, please check the description for our email and for our website. Thanks for listening.